From an early age, Herman Carter understood the human psyche. To analyze and deconstruct something as powerful as the brain intrigued him. He was an apt pupil and gained the attention of his teachers. He excelled in high school and was published in Partisan, a psychology gazette. Within a year, Carter was fast-tracked into Yale's advanced neuroscience program. Really a front for the CIA. Brain power is a must if you're about to conquer the world and demolish foes across the pond. The CIA understood this, so interrogation and intelligence became their number one priority. All they needed were brilliant people, like Carter. Carter and other top-tier recruits transferred off campus and into a secret black site facility in Illinois known as Larry's Memorial Institute. A protege craves a mentor, and that's where Dr. Otto Stamper stepped in, who taught Carter that information is everything, and knowledge is power. He was given all instruments needed, a guiding hand, and more or less everything he asked for. He never realized that sunlight had started to become so scarce, that he too was kept in the dark, because knowledge doesn't only give you power, it also transforms you into a threat. To extract information was his mission. Dr. Stamper encouraged Carter to go further and not to consider this a normal medical facility. No eyes were watching them. There were no rules to abide by. The agency just pointed Carter in the right direction. Then he started to take a few steps back as he saw how Carter could walk on his own. Docile test subjects were exchanged for real-life spies, people that played a role in the troubles outside the facility. Carter shouldered this new role. Project Awakening took form, and on paper, Carter described it as experimental interrogation. It was approved, and over a few months, nobody knocked on his door. Screams and moans filled the corridor outside his lab. But wars skew people and what they accept, as long as the enemy is kept at bay. The fluorescent lights flickered more and more often. Electroconvulsive treatment became a standard dish on the menu. Prisoners held at the facility begged the guards to take them to any other lab but Carter's. Rumors were disregarded in the beginning. Over the years, Carter became known as the Doctor, and no one ever questioned if he had even held a medical certificate or even what happened to the prisoners after they had given up their information. It was only after the Larry's Memorial Institute went silent for a week that they finally uncovered the true horror of what had happened there. Carter's experimental information extraction had turned to horrific and bizarre torture. Patients and prisoners were found dead or in vegetative states with all types of head trauma. In his office, they found the most terrible discovery of all: Dr. Stamper himself. His head peeled open, and an array of electrodes and sensors inserted into his still working but annihilated brain. There was no sign of Herman, the Doctor, Carter, but his research papers suggested that he had been using the prisoners as part of an awful ECT experiment, as he searched for the panacea of mind control. The government didn't want to know. The black site was condemned, and all knowledge of the Larry's Memorial Institute redacted forever. Whether killers perform their heinous acts by the compulsions of their diseased minds, or if they are forced into them by external pressures, has long been a matter of debate. But for one killer, nature and nurture are inextricably linked. Leatherface kills not from a desire to exert his will over others, to satisfy carnal urges, or even to quiet the voices in his head. He kills because he is scared that others will hurt him, scared that his family will be displeased with him, scared that their shared willingness to eat human flesh will be discovered. He does as he is told. His family loves him, and that is all that matters. Outsiders are a threat, and threats need to be dealt with. Like those kids that came into the house uninvited, walked in like they owned the place, looked around the house, trying to find out his family's secrets, no doubt. But Leatherface deals with them, and protects his family just as he's been taught. He's not just protector, he has many roles, and each role has its own face. He serves dinner, cares for the family, and dresses well when they eat. His grandpa and Ma used to care for them all, but Grandpa, he is old now, and Ma has been still for a while, so Leatherface and his brothers had to take over. Family is everything to him. Family is security and safety. But, even though he did his best, one of the kids got away. He tried to stop her, chasing after her as fast as he could, but she had help. Another outsider, driving a truck. The evil trucker killed his brother, ran him over like he was a possum. In a fury, Leatherface leapt at him, the saw ready to avenge his family. But the trucker was too quick. He knocked Leatherface aside and turned his own saw against him. As he watched the outsiders driving away, the rage, grief, and pain combined with the worry about what would happen to his family now. They could surely return with the police, and the police would take his brothers, his grandpa. Without them, what would he do? Without their commands, he would wither and die. As his world collapsed, Leatherface spun in circles, swinging the saw all around, trying to fight off the myriad of external threats that surrounded him. Then another feeling overtook him. It came from outside his vision, crawling over his skin with cold dread. He realized that no matter what outsiders could do to him, there was something worse, something bigger that lived in the shadows. He was filled with a terror unlike any he had ever felt before, but it was almost comforting, like the fear he'd felt with his family, the fear of disappointing them. He was brought to a place that was familiar but unknowable, and he instinctively knew what he had to do. He couldn't fail in, the way he had his family. Outsiders would come, but he would use his skills to overcome any threats. There would be screaming, but he could make the world quiet again, till the only sound remaining was the blessed howl of the saw. Let the outsiders come. Even while he lived, Freddy Krueger was a creature of nightmares for those who truly knew him. Hiding behind a mask of warmth and friendliness, Freddy's actual temperament was known only to his victims. When those victims were finally heard, the parents of Springwood tracked Freddy down and took the law into their own hands. They thought that fire had rid them of a monster that night, that their children were finally safe. But evil as strong as his has a way of surviving. Years passed. The horror was buried. The victims mercifully forgot. Then, somehow, Freddy returned, and dreams became nightmares once again. Freddy focused his anger on those he felt had wronged him, building up to his one true obsession, Nancy Holbrook. But he underestimated her strength and resourcefulness. Together with her friend Quentin Smith, she managed to weaken Freddy, mutilating him and leaving him for dead once more. Death didn't want Freddy the first time he encountered it. Why did they think it would take him now? He emerged once more, consumed with vengeance. Then he turned his sights on the boy who had blocked his path to Nancy, his number one. Freddy invaded Quentin's dreams, terrorizing him night after night until his strength and defenses would be at their lowest. When the time was right, he forced the boy to return to the dark reflection of Badham Preschool, where he would have his final revenge. Freddy stalked the boy through the school's halls. He took his time, savoring every moment of the hunt. This was what he enjoyed the most. The smell of their sweat in the air, the ragged gasps of their terrified breath. They were his to toy with. There was the boy, at the end of a long corridor, too tired and scared to run anymore, resigned to his fate. Freddy closed in, arms wide, claws raking the wall. Their tips traced along a pipe, the metallic shrieking only adding to the boy's apprehension. A shower of sparks rained on the ground, and into the liquid that covered the tiled floor, a blue flame blossomed and quickly engulfed the room. The boy took flight as Freddy burst from the flames in a fury. Rooms and walls raced past in a blur until they were in Freddy's basement. There would be no escape from here. Slowly, Freddy closed in on the boy. His fear was so strong now that Freddy could almost taste it, but his eyes burned with a defiant hatred that was almost admirable. Freddy drew back his claws. Then Freddy felt another presence with him. Something old, powerful, and dark. A miasma enveloped him, and the only sensation was a sound like wooden beams flexing and creaking in the distance. The echoing groan of metal crushed against metal. Something arcane and unknowable, halfway between language and pure terror. A moment of falling and spinning, and then Freddy was back in the school. But not his school. It looked the same, but it felt different. His powers were tempered in some ways, and focused in others. The boy had gone for now, but another prey walked the hallways. Some would be inconsequential. Others would become his new favorites. All would fall before his claws. When John Kramer, better known as Jigsaw, planned for his son to be born during the Chinese Zodiac's Year of the Pig, he wanted it to represent fertility and rebirth, a new beginning for him and his wife, and the start of a charmed life for his son. But that plan was shattered on the night that a junkie broke into his wife's clinic, hoping to score. After this event resulted in the death of his unborn son, John finally caught up with the junkie, making him his first test subject. And the pig was changed forever too. It became a representation of the disease that was rotting John from the inside, a reminder that we are just meat unless we elevate ourselves by our actions, by grasping life from the jaws of death. The pig became a vessel, an agent of Jigsaw, conveying the subjects to their test. For some of those who emerged victorious, the pig could still be a rebirth into their new lives as apprentices, even disciples of Jigsaw. That was the case for Amanda Young, a troubled soul whose life had been a catalogue of harm both to herself and those around her. That changed when she faced and bested Jigsaw's test, deciding her life was worth something, but she became more dependent on John. Her anguish at his impending death combining with a belief that their test subjects weren't capable of saving themselves, of being reborn in the crucible of the games. Seeing this, John presented her with another game, another chance to save herself. But Amanda let her rage and jealousy rule her actions. She failed the test and took a bullet as a consequence. Bleeding out on the tiled floor, darkness engulfed Amanda's vision, accompanied by a sound like creaking wood. Then she was in a forest, once more viewing the world through the eyes of a pig. Trees surrounded her, their branches clawing at her from all sides. Waves of panic washed over her, and she could hear her breath reverberating inside the mask. Had she been damned, cursed to spend her days here in this guise? Or maybe this was another test. Maybe she hadn't failed at all. John always thought one step ahead of everyone else, planned for every eventuality. And he would never give up on her, surely. Jigsaw may have gone, but he had passed her on to another, a being for whom she would be the pig again. Ultimately, she saw now that she had been right in the choices she had made. The time for games was over. There was no chance of redemption for any of them. They were meat, and meat was destined to die. Rin was the only child of the Yamaoka family. She was raised in the dusty halls of a traditional house in Kagawa. She studied education at Takamatsu, a private university, which weighed heavily on her family's shaky finances. Her mother got ill that year and the bills started piling up. Rin worked part-time in a futile attempt to help lighten the load. Her father faced a debt that grew without end. He started working double shifts in hope of obtaining a promotion. That's when he started losing sleep. A dark whisper would keep him awake all night, reminding him of his hopeless situation. Exhausted, he started to lose grasp of reality. Fighting to deny what the voice whispered at night, Rin's father made a desperate move. He met with his superior and explained his situation. He begged for a bonus, an advance, time off, anything. His request was denied. The company had launched a defective production line that was costing them dearly. Someone had to be held accountable, and Rin's father fitted the bill perfectly. He was fired after 22 years of service. That evening, Rin came home from work. She'd stayed late to entertain customers that lingered at the restaurant. As she parked her bike in the shed, she heard her mother's scream come from the house. She rushed in, climbing up the stairs to her parents' room. There she found bits and pieces of her mother on the floor. Her limbs were clean cut, tangled up in an unnatural position. Her breasts were sliced up, revealing her rib cage, which was cracked open. Rin gagged. A sharp katana came crashing down. Rin blocked the blade, which bit into her bare forearm. The shock of recognition interrupted her pain. Her father was wielding the katana with a stoic expression. She cried out to make him stop, but he slashed her arm again. She rushed off and slid on the blood-smeared floor. Using the door frame as support, she raised herself up. The katana ripped through the wall, cleaving her other arm. She screamed in pain as she limped into the hallway, only to be met by her father's blade. She stepped back, trembling, as she held together the soft, loose flesh of her abdomen. Images of her mother's tangled limbs flashed before her eyes. Rin charged at her father, making him stumble back. He punched her torn abdomen, and she recoiled in pain. As she struggled to get back up, he slashed her thigh, making her collapse on the floor. As she crawled towards the stairs, he grabbed her hair and yanked her against a partition. The glass shattered on impact, and she fell through, landing one floor down. She heard footsteps somewhere above her. With effort, she moved, worming her way into a sea of broken glass. The shards gnawed at her, ripping her flesh. He had to be stopped. He would not get away with what he'd done to her, with what he'd done to her mother. Coughing up blood, her chin grazed the glass, adding to the bleeding. A low-pitched heartbeat started to ring in her ears. Her body felt so heavy she could no longer move. The ground shook with her father's footsteps. She knew she wasn't going to make it, but she no longer cared. She would make him pay, in this life or the next. A dark fog slowly veiled her eyes, but it could not subdue her rage. She would not rest, not yet. The darkness whispered, promising blood and revenge. An oath was made, and Rin closed her eyes.